The New Tech Times, a video magazine for the electronic age. In this edition, electronic surveillance. Is Big Brother listening in? Also, computer campaigns, dollars and votes by direct mail. Later, a story about the 60s generation making peace with the new technology. And a look at the latest in micro TVs. All this and more on this edition of The New Tech Times.
The New Tech Times is brought to you through a grant from Wausau Insurance Companies. Times change. Wausau works. And by the collective voice of the consumer electronics industry, CEG, the Consumer Electronics Group, Electronic Industries Association.
Hi, I'm Nicholas Johnson. These are the New Tech Times. George Orwell's book, called 1984, described a society in which, among other things, the government snooped on its citizens. Orwell spotted this trend to lost privacy, even picked the year. But he made a mistake in the cause, because today it's not just governmental threats. We seem to think the invasion of privacy well worth the services provided us by banks, credit cards, the phone company, health centers, insurance companies. There's been remarkably little discussion of 1984, in this the year for which it was named. But the snooping we used to associate with communist states is now standard government procedure here. Ironically, sometimes in the name of anti-communism. Here's Gary Probst's report.
Yes, operator, Madison, Goodrich, Ron.
One of our greatest technological innovations is the telephone. It allows us to talk to people across a continent with the same quality of sound as if you were talking with somebody across the room. But that same technology makes it possible for people to listen to our conversations without a wiretap. Technology is taking away some of our privacy. Satellites are used extensively for the routing of telephone calls. It's efficient and it gives us a better signal through the phone. When you make a long-distance call, it's sent to the satellite through microwave radio signals, which are open for eavesdropping by people with some technical know-how. That's a point of concern for people who monitor the government's vast intelligence and investigative agencies. Ralph McGehee is a former CIA agent. He's testified before Congress on invasion of privacy. McGehee tells of how a secretive organization called the National Security Agency, or NSA, uses technology to spy on U.S. citizens.
Well, it's extremely simple for them to monitor telephone conversations. They can just punch in your numbers on a computer sitting back at the headquarters at NSA, and they'll immediately pick up your phone conversations. There's a lot of other technologies where they can aim laser beams at your windows and pick up conversations going inside in the rooms inside. I feel they can learn anything that you're doing. There's no area that they cannot penetrate and find out what you're doing if they want to do it.
The National Security Agency holds a cache of high-tech surveillance systems within a complex at Fort Meade near Washington. The agency does not give out information about its activities, but people who've investigated NSA claim the devices on the rooftop are used to pull phone conversations down to computers. Thousands of NSA employees reportedly sift through tapes, listening for words about illegal or subversive activity. Reporter James Bamford claims government agencies use NSA to bypass laws requiring search warrants to eavesdrop.
The Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs at one point wanted to eavesdrop on all the pay telephones at Grand Central Station, and they tried to get a warrant to do that, but no judge would issue a warrant because it was too intrusive. So they turned to the NSA, and the NSA agreed to eavesdrop on all the payphones in Grand Central Station. And they did it for a year or 2 years in the early 1970s without ever asking for or receiving a warrant.
Wisconsin Congressman Robert Kastemeyer has been looking into the potential dangers of high-tech surveillance. He senses a move towards the 1984 Society of the National Security State. Kastemeyer says even Congress is kept in the dark.
Unless our science and technology committees or other committees learn about these things and ask questions, in which case they're probably informed on a secret, off-the-record, confidential basis that forbears them from disclosing it to others, they will not learn about these techniques in all probability. We usually can find out about them through technical journals and through others who become aware of them.
Kastemeyer is considering a special task force to stop high-tech intrusions. There's a proposal in Congress for a privacy commission, which would have the power to search the government's intelligence agencies for evidence of abuse. Investigative reporter Jack Anderson says it's a good idea.
It's a bill that would give some teeth to these laws. And I think all of us, if we want to be safe from an all-seeing, all-knowing, all-omnipresent government, must have this kind of legal protection.
The computer is a useful tool for government investigators. At the FBI headquarters, bits of information are stored and cross-referenced on thousands of U.S. citizens. FBI spokespeople say most of that information is on people with criminal records and not the average citizen. Agency computers and electronic surveillance have helped them to cut through the layers of frontmen in organized crime to arrest the people who run the syndicate.
Take these events. We have them entered into the computer so that they can be retrieved at a later time. We're also looking at the use of such things as patterns, artificial intelligence, linkages between one person and another, so that what we come away with is a clear understanding of who these people are and how they operate. Now, we can take this information, then put an individual case in that scenario and say, who are the players for this particular type of criminal activity?
The agents say they still need warrants to eavesdrop, even if the phone conversation is going to a satellite. But critics of government investigative agencies claim the warrant procedure is a farce. There's a special secret court for such purposes, and requests for eavesdropping are never turned down. The director of NSA claims his agency does operate within the bounds of the law and only spies on suspected foreign agents. But critics of government eavesdropping don't believe it.
So probably the need is for Mr. and Mrs. Voter to let his congressman know how he feels about privacy. They now have the instruments. They now have the devices. They now have the means to invade our bedrooms, our bathrooms, our desks, our files. At a push of a button, they can conceivably, with a national data bank, be able to know all about us from the day we were born to the moment I'm sitting here. Now, our founding fathers had a different sort of government in mind. The whole thing's been reversed. Our founding fathers understood the government by its nature tends to oppress those it has power over. They wrote the Constitution to protect the people from the government. Increasingly, the new laws and the new Supreme Court decisions are protecting the government from the people. And the government seems to have increasingly feel a need to be protected from the people.
Government isn't the only threat to your privacy. Your friends may be in on the act. John Wickline tells a true story in his book Electronic Nightmare about an East Coast executive carrying on an affair with an Atlanta rental car agent. Turns out she'd been snooping through company records, discovered he'd rented a car in Los Angeles. She wanted to know why. Woodward and Bernstein, they relied on a credit card company's employee to make copies of a suspect's charge slips for them as evidence. And some of the snooping through computers starts off as good fun and ends up as very serious business. One young man who had such an experience is Neil Patrick of Milwaukee, who's joined us here in the studios. Hi, Neil. Welcome to the New Tech Times.
Hello.
How old are you, Neil?
I'm 17 years
17. How long have you been playing with computers?
old. For about 5 years now. I took a computer class in the 7th grade, and I became interested at that time.
And you have a group called the 414 Club or some such thing. What is that?
That is a group of people who were interested in computers, and eventually our interest grew until we felt that we were interested in accessing and using larger computers.
And where did you get the name 414?
That's the area code of Milwaukee. It came off as a parody on the Milwaukee street gangs.
I see. And the telephone is relevant because you used that in some way, right? I mean, tell us what it is exactly that you did, Neil.
What we would do was, through our home computers, call up a local number and connect up to a network of computers. And by typing in an area code and a two-digit number, we could hook up to a number of computers across the country.
This would be a service like Telenet.
Yes.
So it's a local phone call, but it connects you to these computers.
Right.
Now, I've done that, but once you get that far, you need a password and an account number and so forth. How do you deal with that problem?
What we tried were passwords that were installed on the system or on the computer when the computer was first built. And just by trying these, what are called default passwords, we were able to get into close to 60 different computers.
And give me some examples of what.
Los Alamos Nuclear Research Laboratory, the Security Pacific Bank in Los Angeles, and the Sloan Kettering Memorial Cancer Center in New York.
Well, this sounds like a little something like something out of War Games. What happened then to you? Tell our viewers after this experience.
Well, a few months later, the FBI investigated, and they came to my house, and they came to other members' houses, investigating what they felt was illegal access of computers.
So, as a result of this experience, do you have any advice for young people who might be similarly inclined?
Well, what we felt at the time was an intellectual curiosity. We think now is something that really shouldn't be done. There's a great potential for harm and damage, even through our curiosity and our exploration that we did.
Do you have any advice for companies, institutions that would like to safeguard their computers from the likes of you?
Well, from what we did, prevention would be very easy. All they would have to do would be to change the default passwords that were installed with the system and just turn off the computer at night when they're not using it. Don't leave it up overnight, don't leave it up over the weekend when people with a lot of spare time can try and get into it.
Neil, thank you very much for sharing your experiences with us.
Thank you.
Why is it we always seem to want what we can't have? You may not remember the first television sets, but if you do, you know the screens were very, very small. The challenge then was to make them bigger and bigger, till they now cover a wall. That goal having been reached, we now seem determined to make them as small as we can once again. You've seen a lot of the quality work of New Tech Times senior producer Barry Stoner on these shows. I thought you might like to see him as well. Here he is as a reporter and commentator, squinting to get a look at some of the smallest TV screens we could find.
I'd like to talk to you about something new in TVs. Not this big color set with lots of features in a substantial cabinet. I'd like to show you something a little more modest. This television is black and white, but it is portable, very portable. It's called the Sony Watchman, about the size of one of those FM personal radios with a 2-inch TV screen. It can pick up both UHF and VHF channels, has its own built-in speaker and antenna.
So I'm going to give the wheel a final spin here, and then I will ask you to give me a letter. If it's in the puzzle, you'll have 5 seconds to solve it. Vowels not worth anything, but consonants. I see something coming. $2,000. Okay.
There's even a jack on the side here to plug in a video source like your video cassette recorder or a personal computer. Although if you intend to use it for word processing, you either have to have very good eyes or be a person of very few words. Another micro TV recently out on the market is the TV Watch by Seiko. This little number tries to offer you everything you've ever dreamed about in a watch. It uses liquid crystal display technology to produce a super thin 1.2-inch high-definition black and white TV screen. You still need a pocket-sized control unit to operate the TV Watch and the FM radio that comes along with it. You also need a wire that runs from the control unit to the watch itself, and another wire that acts as an antenna that also goes to these headphones. And because there's no external speaker, you're really tied down to the headphones. A problem I found with the TV Watch is that it's rather cumbersome. You've got to put it on your wrist and then worry about all these wires and whether the antenna is adjusted right so you get good reception. The liquid crystal display is rather unique, but the picture's still rather dull and you have to adjust it just right to get the right light on it to make it crisp. This unit sells for about $500. The Sony Watchman sells for about $200. Frankly, when it comes to personal TVs, I think the Watchman is a rather good buy.
Barry is capable of doing comedy on television, but that view of him covered with the wires and gadgets to support a wristwatch television set was not an example of one of his routines. That's a real product, folks. And it's as good an illustration as I know of these topsy-turvy new tech times. Do you want a TV set, a FM or AM radio, calculator, video game on your wrist? They're all available. Seems like anything's available. The question is, what do we want? No one knows. Neither the manufacturers nor you and I. If you want more evidence of these changing times, look at what's happened to this group of flower children on the farm in the hills of Tennessee.
This quiet agrarian place they call the farm has turned into a showplace of high technology. You can find expensive, complex computer systems within some very basic buildings. Most of the residents of the farm practice some kind of business with the help of high tech. An example is the law office of Albert Bates, an advocate for victims of radiation poisoning.
I'm an old 1960s radical turned high-tech in the 1980s, and I'm a anti-nuclear organizer in a lot of ways. I recently got in a thing just the other day from people out in Utah who are interested in what their radiation dose is from the fallout coming down from the 1950s and forward from the atmospheric weapons testing out there. What I've learned is that you can't always trust the estimates that the government makes, and I've developed some programs that allow me to test their own estimates. I'm getting into lots of complex records. Well, what I do is
At times, Bates sounds more like a businessman in a three-piece suit when he talks of productivity through his computer.
I use this computer to manage my daily affairs, to give me a scheduling ability and a private secretary and a receptionist and so on. It manages my calendar so that I can know what's coming up in certain dates. It allows me to be at places where I need to be, to make phone calls when I have to make them and so forth. It just keeps me reminded. It's like having a staff working for me.
Legal services are provided for those who can't afford to pay. But other high-tech operations are designed to make a profit. It was a natural thing for these children of the earth to get involved in solar power and electricity through windmills. A subsidiary of the farm called Solar Electronics installs alternative energy systems. Through the use of a computer, they've been able to outbid large companies for projects. They took some business from the Tennessee Valley Authority and away from the giant Exxon Corporation.
Before the computer came along, we did this type of work. We tended to round off high, and we're slow about trying to recalculate things over and over again, whereas we allowed the computer to do it for us. And in doing so, our bid was more competitive and we won.
There's a sharp contrast to this rural setting. Huge satellite dishes slowly scan the atmosphere. They're searching for signals from international television. People at the farm install satellite systems, and they monitor stations to print a programming guide for American GIs who are stationed overseas.
Many of the victims were children on their way to school. A group calling itself the Front for the Liberation of Lebanon from Foreigners has claimed responsibility for the attack.
Today?
The group has been involved in several such bombings and put the blame on
This is an example of the 24-hour coverage news you have available with satellite services. This is CNN. And this particular satellite, Satcom 3, you have available about 24 channels.
People at the farm also produce a magazine for satellite television. They publish a large number of books and pamphlets at their computerized print shop. This is the rural Tennessee version of the Silicon Valley, but the profits here in hill country are used not for high living, but for high ideals. People at the farm operate an international hunger relief foundation called Plenty. money is channeled through Plenty to feed people in countries like Guatemala and a small nation near South Africa. They teach better nutrition through soybeans. Plenty also started an ambulance service for the oft-times neglected residents of New York's South Bronx. At first, the idea of joining the high-tech revolution did not appeal to these gentle people. They drew a parallel between computers and the establishment. But now they understand that technology can work both ways to help anyone who learns how to use it.
If you have story ideas or comments, send them to the New Tech Times, 821 University Avenue, Madison, Wisconsin, 53706.
There is a kind of internal tension between natural living and electronics. I feel it. In the late 1960s, I wrote a book appealing to the simple life called Test Pattern for Living, and I still practice much of it. So what am I doing with a computer? What are they doing with computers and satellite dishes on the farm in Tennessee? Would Gandhi have had one? I doubt it. Unless, of course, he was running for office. As reporter Gary Probst found out, the Democrats are discovering this year.
It's a seemingly endless flow of letters being stuffed into envelopes. They're heading for your town and your home. Some people refer to it as junk mail. Those who send it call it direct mail. It's used extensively by companies trying to sell you a product. We all receive some type of direct mail most every day. Now it's beginning to be used on a wide scale by special interest groups, organizations, and political parties. It's all made possible and affordable by the computer. Frank O'Brien is in charge of direct mail for the Democratic National Committee.
It was impossible, 15 years ago for direct mail, whether it was commercial direct mail or political fundraising direct mail, to exist without the computer, because so much of it is dependent upon manipulating millions of names and just mailing those names, and then keeping track of the contributors' records, asking contributors for an amount of contribution that's equal to something they gave before.
The Democratic direct mail system is just starting to roll. Computers were first being installed for the program in November, just a year ahead of the 1984 election. Before the computers, the Democrats bought lists generated by other organizations and companies. They also used voter registration lists. Those provided millions of names for the address labels, but not a lot of information on what kind of message would prompt people to send money or vote. The Democrats are now planning to sift through names and data through their own computers to make their effort more efficient. They have to, because the Republicans have been using computerized mailing lists for years.
The difference between the Republican and Democratic parties right now in fundraising, which is about a 6-to-1 gap, is almost exclusively the difference between their being active in direct mail for the last 12 years and us for the last 3.
An example of the power of direct mail is a set of figures from the Democrats. In 1981, they had 25,000 contributors. Today, they have more than 400,000. And those who give become involved in the political process.
One of the axioms of political campaigning is that if you can get someone to contribute, you've got their vote. So that there's nothing, people have to back up an investment they make.
A potential danger of mass mailing is the creation of one-issue voting. The parties solicit your contribution using information about your lifestyle.
We're writing about education, which is a prevalent issue these days. Lists of identifying households where people are likely to have small children or children in school really works. Senior citizens is another example, with issues like Social Security and Medicare.
But O'Brien says the computer allows them to find a montage of issues that will be of interest to you, and they mail that information accordingly.
It's important for them to be people who would support the party in the general way, because the real profit or the real income that we make from contributors is by resoliciting. And if we attract someone on a very narrow issue who's not going to be supportive of the party and the general principles of the party, it's going to work to our own detriment.
This week we've gone from 1964 to 1984. Electronics are changing everything from alternative lifestyles to government surveillance, from kids watching television sets to programming computer screens. And where do we go from here? Well, to find out, join me next week. We look at these stories.
In the next edition of the New Tech Times, historic renovation is made more authentic using computers. We'll look at the role new technology is playing in the reconstruction of Williamsburg, Virginia. Also, software designed for girls. Is a departure from rough and tumble the key to attracting girls to computing? This and more, the next edition of the New Tech Times.
For the New Tech Times staff, I'm Nicholas Johnson.
The New Tech Times has been brought to you through a grant from Wausau Insurance Companies. Times change, Wausau works. And by the collective voice of the consumer electronics industry, the CEG, the Consumer Electronics Group, Electronic Industries Association.